Hello, welcome to Iceland. Nice to meet you all. So my name is Andri Snær Magnason, and I'm going to talk to you about time and water, and the great paradigm shift that we're currently living in and living through. Kind of the quote that I use in the beginning of the book is, in the end, we will conserve only what we will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. I met a climate scientist in Potsdam, in Germany, and I had been writing stories, and I had been an activist for the preservation of Icelandic nature, and he asked me, why don't you write about climate change? And I said, I'm not a scientist, I don't feel like I have authority, my father's a doctor, he really hates when normal people are giving medical advice, so I don't feel I have the authority or the knowledge to write about climate change. But he said, I'm a scientist, I produce science, graphs, and information about the future. And people don't understand graphs, but they understand stories. And you're a storyteller. I can give you my graphs, and please tell these stories. And I started to look into these studies and kind of focus more on these issues, and I was thinking, there was something wrong. Why had this been discussed, and why did the authority of climate scientists not reach policy or public behavior? Why did we, in a strange way, not understand it? And I was thinking maybe the problem is somewhere in language, that the issue is in some way larger than language. If I, for example, say, in the year 2100, we expect the world ocean's pH level to drop from 8.1 to 7.7, and this is the greatest change in 50 million years. I just said it. Almost everything I said is meaningless. That is 2100 for us. I think most of us are culturally kind of coded with the year 2000 as the future. Throughout all elementary school and throughout our lives, 2000 was the future. And most of my friends, when I ask them, do you believe 1970 was 30 years ago? And they say, yes, of course. And I'm like, are you sure? And they're like, oh my God, it's 50 years, half a century ago. And in a strange way, it feels like people in Glasgow, they actually think when we have this deadline of 2050, they actually think it's 50 years into the future, but not almost 25 years soon. So in a strange way, it was like the issue was like a black hole. You can't look straight into a black hole. The only way to understand a black hole is by looking at the periphery, looking at how the black hole is pulling in neighboring stars and galaxies. So I was thinking, why don't we understand 2100? Why don't we understand 50 million years? How can we understand a pH level 8.1 to 7.7, 0.3, 0.4 is always small. So I was thinking, maybe one of the ways of talking about this is by not talking about it. To understand the future, maybe I have to talk about the past. To understand science, maybe I need mythology. To be global, maybe I have to be personal. So the issue of time, and my first kind of encounter with deep time, was my first summer job where I was working for the Árni Magnason Institute in Iceland. And this institute keeps the medieval manuscripts of Iceland, and these are kind of the national treasures. And they were on display for one summer, I think it was 96 or something. And, but they were very bad at marketing. So nobody came to see the manuscripts. So I was alone with these manuscripts for a whole summer. And in hindsight, it's almost like being alone with the Beatles or something, because this is the prime source of Nordic mythology, the inspiration of Tolkien, Wagner, and Marvel Comics, Thor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I was starstruck that I could actually read something, still in Icelandic. You can see, do I have a beamer here? Yeah. Deyr fé, deyja frendur, deyr sjálfur sama, en orðstýr deyr aldrei hveim sér góðan getur. So it's like, wow, I didn't even have education in reading medieval manuscripts, but I could still read it because it's better than my father's handwriting. And it's your family dies, you will die, your cattle will die, but your reputation will never die. And I was thinking, can you write something, think something that will resonate and influence somebody after 800 years? Like, what could we do now that somebody in the year 2800 will relate to? How can we decide to preserve this manuscript for 800 more years? So I was torn this summer because my uncle John, he was a biologist, and he had invited me to come and help him do research on the mating habits of the anaconda snakes in the Amazon. He was doing kind of the primal research, and then we were supposed to go and catch crocodiles in Mamirau, a nature reserve, like the black caiman crocodile. This was, of course, very exciting for a 23-year-old, but then I was expecting a child, and it's not like the first thing that you do is to say, and I just have to check out these anacondas. So my life path did not go into science and biology, but rather into mythology and storytelling. And there was one thing in the basement of this institute that was far more inspiring than even the manuscripts. There were thousands and thousands of hours of old women, old fishermen, old farmers singing lullabies, hymns, telling stories that they had learned from their grandfathers, that they had learned from their grandfathers.
Björgúlfur Hringsson, Hringur Hreiðarsson, Hreiðar Garðsson, Garður Gunnarsson, Gunnar Refsson, Refur Ráðfinnsson, Ráðfinnur Kolsson, Kolur Kjörvaldsson, Kjörvaldur Bjórsson, Bjór Brettingsson, Brettingur Hakason.
So this woman was born 1888, singing a lullaby that she learned from her grandmother, born 1834, singing a lullaby that she knew that she had learned from her grandmother, born 1775. So I was putting these headphones on my ears, and I was listening to these old women. They had never performed in a place like this. It was just something they had done for their inner family, and I was thinking, wow, I'm listening to an echo of somebody that was out there 1785, and then in the manuscripts we knew that this lullaby existed in the Middle Ages. And I was thinking of this time and continuity, and how something goes from being something that everybody remembers, everybody knows, everybody understands and relates to, until it becomes rare, until a folklorist is desperately running between elderly homes looking for the last old lady that remembers a fragment of this song just to see that she had a heart attack the week before or something. So I was thinking about the values that I had around myself, my inner family, because I was so lucky that I had 2 grandmothers and 3 grandfathers. And I was thinking, just their life stories, kind of from 1920 to 2010, 20, how these stories would become remarkable in the years of my own children, just if I would record some fragments of it. So like my Amadisa, she was 8 years old when she was sent from her family to northern Iceland to babysit, like 8 years old babysitter. And she didn't come home until she was 15. And I was like, wow, it's so short since this was, and you're discussing well-being and happiness, and you could really feel this kind of line of from lack of everything. And then my other grandfather, totally born in a farm in northern Iceland before any consumer society existed, where he could, he said he would eat everything that could fly, swim, or run, except humans, but I was never sure. And just how short this time, living in this consumer society, getting everything from the supermarket, from almost being like hunter-gatherers with some farming animals. My other grandfather that lost his father at sea when he was 10 and started working for his family and his 3 siblings. And for his first payments when he was a teenager, when he finally had a bit more money, he bought himself a camera. And he became an amateur photographer, and he was used at the annual games to evaluate who won the races. So he would snap a picture, and he would run home, develop the film, and come back, and they could declare who won the race. And then kind of the history of feminism and women, because my grandmother, she was the first woman in Iceland to fly. And she was kind of always the pride of the family and kind of breaking into a territory that did not belong to women. And her flight certificate, I think, is always like a very good kind of reminder. There are two things. The first, she would have turned 98 yesterday, but she died in March. The other is fæddur. That is, when a paradigm shift happens, you go against the language. That is, you don't just go against the norms of society. Sometimes you go against the foundations of language itself. So if you understand Icelandic, then you know that fæddur is masculine as being born. Fædd, without the is to be born as a woman. So they did not expect women to be born to fly. So I was just randomly gathering all this, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know where it would go. And my grandmother's second husband, Árni, he was a great mountaineer, and she was also a mountain lover, and they went on the first expeditions with the Icelandic Glacial Research Society as their honeymoon in 1956. And these were extreme trips, and they were stuck in a tent for 3 days when a blizzard was raging over, and asked them, weren't you cold? And they said, cold, we were just married. And I was 10 when I asked the first time, and I was like, how do you get warm when you get married? And the glacier was nameless at the time, and now this place is the 13th highest peak in Iceland, and it's called the Bride's Belly. And then my grandfather in America, because he left my grandmother and moved to America in the 40s, and he became a surgeon in New York, and he actually sold more books about the gastric pass than I have sold. And he was chief surgeon of the New York hospital, and he had, of course, many of the most prominent patients in the world because they went to that hospital. And one of his patients was this man here, Oppenheimer. And I was starstruck because at the time I was, of course, with the generation with total nuclear anxiety. So I was asking him, did you see something strange when did you feel anything when you were operating on him? And he said, I had this flash image of Christ on the operating table because he looked exactly like the picture of Christ in my childhood church in Bíldudalur in West Iceland. And I went to that church, and he wasn't so far off. But Oppenheimer wasn't just famous. He wasn't just a figure. He was basically the person or human of the 20th century that comes closest to have a mythological status. That is, Prometheus went to the highest mountain and came down with fire and gave it to humans. Oppenheimer went into the smallest material and came out with something greater than a volcano and created fire gods out of the leaders of the world. And for the first time, humanity had the ability to destroy itself over a weekend. Something that not even gods had before. And I asked my grandfather if I would write this story on a piece of calfskin and put it into the Manuscript Institute, and somebody reads it after 800 years. How does mythology look like? Because Prometheus was punished by an eagle that gnawed out his liver, and I asked him, what did you do to Oppenheimer? And he said, I'm under oath, it's a secret, just say it was hemorrhoids. So Oppenheimer, he marks a place for us humans, or geologists believe that the explosion, the Trinity explosion, marks the beginning of the Anthropocene, that is where human activity and human presence and humans basically have become the fundamental geological force shaping this planet. And this puts us in a completely different place than anybody knew when they were writing or telling mythological stories in the old days. So I was thinking what I could do with this in the future, and I was writing children's books and poetry and sci-fi and all sorts of things, but things started to become quite strange here in Iceland. This is Þjórsárver, and this is the greatest nesting place of pink-footed geese in the world. And our government wanted to build a dam and flood this area entirely, and basically destroy the habitat of a whole species. And this was in 1999, and I felt like there's nothing that I can write that is as valuable as a nesting place of a species. And I just had this block. I just could not get this out of my mind. And it was so interesting that I felt like I was in a regime, because I could not say, this is beautiful. I could not say, this is important. I could not say, it's unethical to take this away. I had to say, this could be a good national park, and it could create revenue for tourist agencies. This could be good for the brand of Iceland. Or I could say, if you destroy this, it would be bad for tourism. I could not use any words like, I could not say, this area is holy. Like a travel history from 1930, a person came there and he basically said, in Þjórsárver, I connect to the space dimension of God. But if I went to a TV interview and said I connect to the space dimension of God, I would be taken to the mental hospital. So I was thinking, why, when we were at the richest, because we did not need the energy, it was going to an aluminum smelter, why could I not speak? Why did just the fact that this was a whole species, why did that not make sense in the debate about economic growth, jobs, etc.? Why was I in this regime? Why was I restricted to talk about tourism, marketing? I could say this would be a good place for a Star Wars movie, but I could not say it's holy. Animals own this, they belong there. So I was thinking of language and kind of what we're able to say. Like in the year 990, a skaldic poet that was writing poetry under the rules of Nordic mythology. He could not say sky, he had to say dwarf's helmet. He could not say earth, he had to say Odin's bride. That was how you could refer to these elements in poetry. But then Christianity came, and how do you write about the creator of the dwarf's helmet and Odin's bride? You could not talk about Christianity or the new paradigm without having the whole legacy of the old mythology in the explanation. In 1809, exactly where we're standing here, we had a peculiar event where there was a uprising of a British soap merchant with his Danish translator. They arrested the local Danish authorities because we were under the King of Denmark, and they were not allowed to do business with Icelanders. There was a monopoly of Danish merchants. So these guys, they arrested the local government. We had no military presence. They just kept us psychologically or something. And this guy, Jørgen Jørgensen, he was very inspired by the French Revolution. And he was basically soaked in the waves of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And he saw this poor nation here that was under a king, and he could write a declaration of independence like we write a Facebook status today. So he became the temporary ruler of Iceland, and he said, the 1st of July, 1810, we will then resign when a proper and suitable constitution shall be fixed upon, and the poor and common people shall have an equal share in the government with the rich and powerful. So for us, this seems like a birthright, something that we're born with wanting. The problem is that in 1809, the French Revolution had not been translated into Icelandic. Nobody had asked for independence, and nobody understood these concepts. These were totally alien words. Constitution, what is that? And what nonsense the poor and common should have an equal, it's just totally hilarious. So we called him Jørgen, the king of the dog days, because all these ideas, they just sounded absurd, outlandish, but they just made no sense in reality. So in 1809, we had a summer of independence, but we didn't understand the concept, and nobody took the torch, and how do you have a parliament? What do you do? How do you stand? Where do you go? Who raises his hand? How do you dress? We had no idea of what this was. What's a prime minister? What is a not king? We didn't understand it. And the people that actually became the independence heroes of Iceland, they were born in the year 1809. And even when they were reaching their 50s, in 1850 or 60, their ideas were still revolutionary. Max Planck says that a scientific truth is often not by convincing the opponents, but because they die out and a new generation comes up with new ideas. And we can see that in many stories of paradigm shifts, like Copernicus. It wasn't like everybody said it's a great idea. That's how I think the world is. It took more than 100 years of debate and prosecution. It took more than 100 years for Iceland to become independent. It wasn't until 1918 that we had the same status as we had that brief summer of 1809. And in 1918, women got the equal rights to vote. And of course you would think, yeah, women think women are equal to men. But no, for 100 years, women voted for men. Until this year, we had the first real parliament that was equally voted. 100 years after, we had equal rights to vote. This place here is a historical place of paradigm shifts. This is where Reagan and Gorbachev met in 1986, and marks the end of the Soviet Union. And this is the headquarters of Kaupthing Bank, the third biggest bankruptcy in capitalist history. So it's like ebony and ivory. And I was 35 when the bank crashed, and I was like, with all the language systems that come with both ideologies of hierarchy and education and telling us what is success and what is not. And I was lying in this bush here, and I was meditating on what idea might be next, what's crashing next, what language do we use next. And it was quite obvious, because in a paradigm shift, either you are part of the change or you are hit by the change. And there are words coming out now that were not mentioned in your elementary school, probably not in your college, maybe not in your universities. I'm assuming your age here, sorry. But because this word was created in the year 2004, and this word was first mentioned in Icelandic newspapers in the year 2006. Once 2006, once 2007, never 2008, we were busy crashing the banks, and twice in the year 2008. So what does this word mean? Well, this word is about global warming's evil twin, that is the chemical effect of CO2 versus the physical effect of it, that is the chemical effect of how it reacts to the world oceans, and how we expect the world ocean pH level to drop dramatically during the next, until 2100. And this is the biggest change for 50 million years. And what are 50 million years if humans, the first footsteps in Kenya are like 5 million years ago? It means that a single human being born today, becoming as old as my grandmother is now, will experience a greater change in the oceans than not all his ancestors or her, but the whole evolution of humanity times 10. And that is mythology. If you read the Bible, the world was created in 6 days or 7 days. And so 7 days are actually a closer time span to 100 years than 100 years are to 50 million years. So this is nature leaving geological speed, entering human speed, and this means that everything that we have learned in school, anywhere, has to be rethought, reevaluated, recalculated, because nobody was expecting this outcome. But still, it's not yet happening. But the problem is we don't have 100 years to understand this term until 2106, which would be the 100-year span. So what is happening is that we're having a completely different ocean from the ocean that we used to have. And the ocean goes from being oversaturated of aragonite to being undersaturated. Oversaturated ocean wants to give material to cell-building animals, and undersaturated ocean wants to receive and dissolve cells. So this is a fundamental change that means that almost everything should be recalculated and rethought. So I was going through these kind of documents about this when I got a strange phone call, and I was invited to interview the Dalai Lama. And that was like, came as a surprise, and it wasn't really in the path of what I was thinking. And but the Dalai Lama means the great ocean in Mongolian, so I could maybe fit it somewhere. And I was thinking, what can I ask a person that has reincarnated 14 times? You know, how was your 7th life compared to your 11th life? Have you fallen in love? I was also respecting his time because, you know, he has a whole nation on his shoulders, and I was thinking, what can I bring to the table? What can I ask him? And so I went to the meeting, and I was thinking of cows. Because India is, of course, full of holy cows, but in Nordic mythology, the world started with a frozen cow. It's a very bizarre myth. It's almost like a misunderstanding, a whispering game that went wrong. So in the beginning of time, there was nothing, and then came the frozen cow. And from the udders of the cow come the 4 rivers that nourish the world, and the name of the cow is Auð Humla, or Humla of prosperity. And you can make Thor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you can't make the frozen cow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Hollywood Marvel Comics context. So, but in India they have this world cow, and her name is Kamadhenu, and the foundations of that cow are the Himalayas. And I thought, well, that's interesting. The world cow, the Mother Earth, is resting on the Himalayas, and the shoulders and the eyes have meanings as all sorts of deities. And but if you reach the great section of the Great Himalayan Trail, then it ends in Humla at the border with Tibet. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And there you will find Mount Kailash, which is the most holy mountain in the world, the throne of Shiva and the center of the universe for Buddhists. And from there come the 4 great rivers of Asia, the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Sutlej. And the source of the Ganga is in another district of the Himalayas, and that's a glacier, and it's called Kamuk, and it means the mouth of the cow. And I was like, yes, of course, now it makes sense. A frozen cow as a source of life is a perfect metaphor for the role of glaciers that keep water when it's abundant and actually damaging, keeps it until the dry season and hot season comes, and then it releases it gracefully, and you get exactly that water you need for your crop to survive that period. So I thought, okay, this is something that I can ask His Holiness.
We're born from mother. Ultimately, I think we're born from cow, according to your myth. But even cow, okay, it's very compassionate cow. Magic cow.
Magic cow.
Magic cow.
Yeah. So I went home. He thought I was from a cow cult in the north. But actually he's very rational and scientific, and his worries were more earthbound than this.
Worry. Already now there is clear sign to develop that kind of worry. And then inside Tibet, according to many people, now the many century-old glacier now reducing, and temperature also increasing. Many scientists, many ecologists give sort of prediction now within next 20, 30 years, some major rivers reduce, some river may dry. Before that, because of a lot of melting snow, so the more flood, then eventually dry. So very, very serious. Usually I have the feeling, and also telling people, unless we take special care, if present sort of tendency go continuously, then in next generation, I think over billion human beings' life then get that threatening, because the major rivers in whole Asia, which cover whole Asia, from China up to Pakistan, the major rivers come from Tibetan Plateau. So if the worldwide people pay more attention about some sort of effort, I think this warming can be a little postponed. So it is very, very serious. Now this is the question of not just a few people or few countries, but this is a question of whole world. So 6 billion human beings, whether you survive or not, depend on that. If whole world become desert, then everybody have to go. I think nobody wants that.
So from being a kind of curious coincidence of interviewing a 14th reincarnation of a holy man, I kind of come across this greatest geopolitical crisis that we might be faced with in the future. And that actually points back to glacial research and actually started to make sense in the arts of the story that I was writing. Because in 1956, they started researching and mapping these glaciers, or in the 50s actually. So for 70 years, they have this data of how glaciers react to warming. And again, we see how nature is leaving geological speed and changing on a human level. And this is kind of the fundamental crisis of our time. That is, not only the oceans are changing, but the glaciers are melting, and of course the glaciers do not vanish. They turn into ocean that rises. And in a very strange way, culturally, I think we have to hurry up and understand and relate to dates like 2120, 2140, even 2160. When a climate scientist says 2070, 2100, we feel like, oh, that's Hunger Games. That's, Blade Runner was 2019. And that was the furthest that generation could imagine, 2019. And 2001 Space Odyssey. But 2160, what does that have to do with us? We can calculate, when is someone still alive that you will love? So I sat in the kitchen with my grandmother and my daughter that carries the name of my grandmother. And my grandmother, she was 97. My daughter, she was 13. And she calculated, when will you be sitting in this kitchen with your grandchild or great-grandchild? You might buy this house someday. When will you share your life stories? And you become like 98. And she does the calculation, and she's like, oh my God, 2104. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you'll have a clear mind, and medicine you'll just have finished your last Ironman when you're 70. So maybe you'll be sitting here in this kitchen with your favorite grandchild, because your children will probably misunderstand you, but your grandchildren, they will appreciate your stories. So you'll be sitting in the year 2100 with your favorite, one of your kind of favorite connections in life. It could be a neighbor, it could be a child. Somebody born maybe 2080. Not like a child, not like a baby, but you'll be sitting here with a person that you've kind of followed for 20 years, like from your 70s to your 90s. And when is that person still remembering you as your greatest influence in life? And she does the calculation, okay, 2180, 2080, 2170. And I tell her, yes, you will love somebody that will remember you in the year 2170. You can ask your grandmother to tell your secret. Don't tell it to me. You can whisper that secret in the year 2100 and tell that person to tell that secret out loud in a family party in the year 2170 without ever having that being written down. Because your time is the time of the people that you know and love, the time that creates you, and your time is the time of the people that you will know and love, the time that you create. You can touch almost 250 years with your bare hands, and everybody should do this calculation. 2170, 2120. We should feel, when a climate scientist says 2100, we should not feel like it's Hunger Games or beyond our imagination. We should feel like it's only halfway in our innermost circle of love and relationships and continuity and the meaning of our lives, actually. So, when is someone still alive that you will love? Thank you.